Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a regular meeting of the panel of utility commissioners and staff of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, held today, Wednesday, July 6th at 10 a.m. by remote teleconference. My name is Chairman Marissa Gillette, and I'm joined virtually today by my colleagues, the Vice Chairman Jack Rakowski and Commissioner Michael Karen. We have a regular calendar and a consent calendar in front of us today. So we will turn first to our regular calendar, which is docket number 21-1105. PURA's investigation into complaints regarding unsafe utility poles in Avon and Simsbury. So we'll turn to Mr. Steve Capozzi to give us a presentation for the panel's consideration, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, panel. So pursuant to the authority's broad statutory powers and obligations under section 1611, 1618, 1619E, subsection A, 16243, and 16247H of the General Statutes of Connecticut, this decision establishes a standardized process called the structurally compromised pole process. This process is intended to identify and address structurally compromised poles to protect both the safety of the utility workers and of the public. The structurally compromised pole process provides also a process that both pole custodians and entities with attachments on the poles, called pole attachers or pole licensees, are required to follow with respect to the timely removal and transfer of facilities that are attached to the structurally compromised poles. So based on the framework set up in this decision, pole custodians are required to comply with the process after receiving notice of a potentially structurally compromised pole. This notice can come from either a customer or through the PURA's Office of Education, Outreach, and Enforcement. The structurally compromised pole process also requires has the following elements. So within 48 hours of receiving notification of a potentially structurally compromised pole, the pole custodian will have an employee or a contractor inspect the pole to assess whether the pole is in compliance with safety codes. If the pole custodian determines that the pole is not unsafe and is in compliance with relevant safety code, then the process requires that the representative replace the identified pole in accordance with its normal business practice, including through its relevant pole replacement and removal programs. The authority has an order in here that directs the companies to develop a means to track these poles that it identifies as not unsafe. If the pole custodian determines that the pole is indeed compromised, structurally compromised, or otherwise not in compliance with the NESC provisions, the process requires the custodian representative or the pole custodian to replace the pole within 10 days of the initial notification of the potentially compromised pole. If a pole custodian is unable to have that inspected or does not want to have a representative assess the pole's compliance with the NESC, then the process requires that the pole custodian replace the pole within 10 days of the initial notification. Also, and upon receipt of written notification from the pole custodian, licensees have to have their attachments removed and transferred to a new pole within 3 days of the replacement pole being set. And finally, if a pole that the pole custodian representative determines is not structurally compromised, if there's a pole that the pole custodian has determined or has made the designation that it is not structurally compromised, if that pole subsequently fails during that to the initial 10-day pole replacement period, if it fails during blue sky conditions, so absent an intervening act such as a motor vehicle collision or damage that occurred during a storm, the pole failure shall constitute evidence of imprudence, and the pole custodian shall be subject to financial consequences, including the prohibition of recovery of expenses associated with the pole failure and replacement in a future rate proceeding, and civil penalties pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 1641. So that concludes the summary of the decision, and now I recommend this decision to the Commissioner panel.
Thank you, Mr. Capozzi. Is there a motion?
I move adoption, Madam Chairman.
Second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The decision has been regularly moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments? If not, I want to thank Mr. Posey for his presentation, and I would ask Mr. Bumpin to please take the roll.
Chairman Gillette,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Bukowski,
Yes.
Commissioner Karen,
Yes.
Thank you. The decision has been adopted. We will turn next to docket number 181222, the investigation into amnesty for suppliers pursuant to Connecticut, the investigation into amnesty for suppliers for Connecticut General Statute, section 16-245D, subsection A2, next cycle rate violations. I'll turn to Attorney Kim White for the presentation of today's decision, please.
Thank you and good morning. And as you just illustrated, there's a reason we were just calling this the amnesty docket for quite some time. A few years ago, we realized that many suppliers were not accurately providing the next cycle rate violations to the EDCs for display on the supply summary portion of residential customer bills pursuant to Congen-Stat 16-245D. We thought the most appropriate remedy for this would be restitution to the customers for the difference in the amount that was displayed on their bill versus the amount that they actually paid. However, at that time when we realized this, the statutes did not allow PURA to order restitution for customers. So we created this docket that would allow suppliers to self-report their violations. Then they would provide restitution to customers through a bill credit process. As a result, they wouldn't be penalized. The docket took a little time to develop because the bill credit process had to be put in place to work with the EDCs on that. Suppliers had to self-report their violations. Authority staff then audited these self-reports. Sometimes it took a few audits for the self-report to be identified as correct. And then at that point, the suppliers were released to begin the bill credit process, which took roughly 15 months between when they first started issuing the bill credits, have some time to identify every single customer, and then came back to us and filed their final report. The final report was filed approximately 2 weeks ago from the last supplier, and that has now concluded this docket. So as a result, this is the final decision for the docket, summarizing that process that I just summarized for you. And we are hoping that this concludes the docket that has greatly benefited many residential customers. We recommend adoption of the decision.
Thank you, Attorney White. Is there a motion?
I move adoption, Madam Chairman.
Second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The decision has been regularly moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments?
Amen.
Nice
I'm
work.
glad. Congratulations. This has finally been completed. And I congratulate Attorney White for her diligence on this particular docket. Thank you.
Well said. With that, I think we should take the roll. Mr. Bumpin?
Chairman Gillette,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Bukowski,
Yes.
Commissioner Karen,
Yes.
Thank you. The decision has been adopted. So that concludes our regular calendar. We will turn to our consent calendar on which there are 20 items. So I'm seeking a motion with respect to the consent calendar, please.
Madam Chairman, I move adoption of today's consent calendar.
Second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The consent calendar has been regularly moved and seconded. Mr. Bumpin, please take the roll.
Chairman Gillette,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Bukowski,
Yes.
Commissioner Karen,
Yes.
Thank you. The consent calendar has been adopted. That brings us to the end of today's regular meeting agenda. We will adjourn and reconvene next Wednesday, July 13th at 10 a.m. by remote teleconference. Thank you and have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week.